Sometimes as a YouTuber, you don't like to be correct, and this was one of those instances. Now, I very recently made a somewhat psychotic video claiming that about 3 seconds of a trailer clip that was featured in the reveal for Black Ops 6 was in fact the new map for Black Ops 6's Warzone called Avalon. At the time, we didn't have an official name, but we do now, and it seemed to me that this map that very briefly appeared in the background of a trailer was in fact going to be the future of Warzone. That was until Verdansk 2025 was announced, and they decided to put this thing on the back burner, meaning that you won't see a brand new Warzone map this year, and you're gonna get Verdansk in March of 2025. So this is the map that wasn't to be. We probably will get Avalon later in 2025, but for now, you can actually see what it was going to be like almost immediately. You see, Avalon is actually very much in the game. It's the entire training arena, and in fact, the entire training arena for Black Ops 6's beta has been based on one of the small islands that was going to make up the entire map. So you can actually get a feel for what was going to be for Avalon. Both this small tiny island, which is a little snapshot of some of the design philosophy behind what you would assume would apply for most of the map, and also just actually looking at the map itself in a very low textured format. Now, before I get into talking about some of the other interesting things that you can find out about Avalon in this training area, because even just in this small snapshot, you can actually see a lot going on, it seems to me that it's worth talking about the training area itself. Because one of the things that really stands out to me is how well designed even just this tiny island is as part of Avalon is just for Omni movement. The stairwells, the way the doors are designed, the way there's a little bit of verticality but not too much, the way there seems to be decent head glitches and cover holds for pretty much every single lane in this small island. I was pretty much the first person to dunk on Treyarch for saying that Area 99 or Arena 99 or whatever the hell they're calling that new Resurgence map looks like just didn't seem to have any kind of general design for a battle royale or even a Resurgence map. It lacked cover, it lacked thought process, and it didn't seem to have decent lanes in it. But even just this tiny training area seems to rubbish that idea, and this small snapshot and segment of Avalon actually is really well made, especially when you factor in the Omni movement system. You can literally run around the map, this small little area, and you can really get a sense and feel that this was going to fit the new movement extremely well. Now you might be wondering, why the hell am I talking about the design philosophy of what is ultimately about 1.5% of the new map that was supposed to come to Black Ops 6? Well, the reason for it is that Area 99 or Arena 99 or whatever the hell it's meant to be called just didn't look that well designed. And one of the biggest concerns I actually have about us not getting a big map with the release and integration of Black Ops 6 isn't that it's going to be a bad thing when Verdansk returns, but that Verdansk was not designed for any of the systems that we currently have in Warzone. If you go back and play Verdansk now, it is a barren wasteland map with mostly empty space, and you can see this right now on Warzone Mobile for yourself, because the Warzone Mobile version is in fact accurate. So much has changed in Call of Duty since Verdansk was even a thing. I mean, we have portable zip lines now. We have, a general inclination and belief that cover and building density is supposed to be somewhat important. Even just basic building design philosophy has completely changed. We want multiple zip lines going up to rooftops and multiple stairwells and ladders. We don't want entire skyscrapers where the only way to get up is a single individual stairwell. There has been a massive revamp in how Warzone fundamentally works since Verdansk was designed. And whilst most people love the map, and I do have great memories of it too, I think objectively you just have to be honest in saying that it wasn't a very well-designed Battle Royale map. There are hundreds of buildings in that map where the only way up is a single ladder or a single zip line. There are multiple areas where camping is just rife, and multiple areas of the map where it's just wide open with zero cover. I mean, you only need to look at the transition from something like Stadium towards Dam to see just how much I'm talking about some pretty bad cover design. And all of that was fine back in 2020 when everybody was fresh and trying these things for the first time and people weren't popping 65 different smoke grenades to move from place to place. And everybody was okay with the fact that occasionally you'd run into a camper on a rooftop and basically couldn't do anything to get rid of him. But times have completely changed. We have bunker busters now, we have zip lines, we have portable zip lines, we have so many things now that have fundamentally reworked how Warzone works that Verdansk almost feels like it probably isn't going to fit. And in a similar sense, all of these new movement systems in some ways are going to feel somewhat incompatible with the design of Verdansk unless they change parts of it or change elements of it to update it to what would work with Omni movement. So part of the reason for me even mentioning the map that wasn't meant to be and is coming hopefully later in 2025 is just the simple fact that we're now facing a situation where we have a big map for Warzone that was never made with Omni movement in design. And it's something that genuinely is a concern for me and something that I thought about often. With that all out the way, there are some really cool things that you can see in the training area about what Avalon was going to offer. Even in the small snapshot trailer that you saw, there are some really interesting design decisions with Avalon that you can actually just see from some of these screenshots on screen and some of the areas in the actual bunkers themselves. Because Avalon seemed to have a real emphasis on mixed verticality and also a real emphasis on building PUBG-like choke points. To start with, Avalon itself doesn't seem to have one specific peak, but it does have a number of various peaks throughout all of the objectives. There are areas throughout the map which are very clearly sort of elevated from the base layer of the map that are supposed to be sort of sticking out as decent areas and points of interest. Hell, even the map's skyline from the multiplayer beta, quote-unquote the name Skyline, is part of Avalon. And you can see that when you load into the map and it tells you that it takes place on Avalon in 1991. Now, I mention again, even some of the multiplayer maps feel really well designed in terms of how Omni movement's supposed to work and how we were probably going to miss that with Verdansk and yada yada yada. I've made that point already, but just to double down, some of these multiplayer maps do actually feature within the Battle Royale, so it's a real shame that we didn't get to see some of that. But like I was saying, seemingly a decent amount of verticality in some places that seems to ebb and flow. It seems to go up and down a lot. And I feel like this was to utilize the Omni movement system a little bit more. They wanted people to be a little bit more movement heavy, perhaps consider diving off certain cliff faces, consider diving off certain, skyscrapers, points of interest, things that would have made sense. There also happens to be a fair bit of space in between some of the alleged points of interest that you can see just by looking at some of the stuff in the bunker. But what's most interesting about it to me is that the waterway system that goes through the map, when combined with some of the bridges and combined with the fact that there's a bit of elevation on some of the points of interest, seems to create lots of choke points. I mean, even if you just look at the bridge segment between 2 points of interest, that is a huge PUBG-style choke point where the water is actually large and expansive enough that crossing it is a risk and you would want to be on land. Now, the fact of the matter is that Treyarch simply haven't actually made a Battle Royale map since Blackout, really. I mean, they just haven't really been all that hands-on. So this is the first map they've made since then, and you can actually get a bit of a Blackout feel from this. And Blackout definitely took a lot of notes from PUBG in terms of design and in terms of philosophy for creating good Battle Royale gameplay. Now, back when I made that mildly psychotic video talking about how I've seen the new Warzone map in a trailer and everybody told me that I was 1000% incorrect, I did point out that this felt like it was a very methodically designed map. Even the bridges had different height variances to them, so there was advantages to one bridge or the other. The general objectives and points of interest on the map seemed to have a sort of compactness about them that meant you were effectively entering mini multiplayer maps as opposed to playing through a large, sprawling area like we've seen in Urzikstan. In Urzikstan, all the buildings and points of interest seem to be pretty largely connected, and it means you can move from cover to cover quite efficiently, but they do lack a bit of identity. In comparison, Avalon seems to have a lot less density and focuses on very bespoke and very distinct POIs, and creates lots of choke points and lanes when you actually have to travel to those locations. So all in all, Avalon looks a lot more like something you would expect from a Blackout or PUBG style map with the Warzone era. So it's very interesting to see that this was going to be a pretty large departure not only from Verdansk, but also even from Urzikstan and Al Mazrah. I really feel like Treyarch were trying to build a very independent and very identifiable big map experience. One of the biggest criticisms of Urzikstan has just been the fact that it's felt very samey and isn't very memorable, and I really feel like Avalon intended to be as memorable as humanly possible. I really feel like they wanted to make these POIs across the entire map feel almost like dropping into a multiplayer experience. The one thing I will say about all of this is that in order to achieve some of this, they have broken up the map with some verticality, which I'm definitely not against, as long as it isn't one gigantic mountain in the middle of the map. I'm looking at you, Caldera, because that was awful for gameplay design. But what they have done is introduced a fairly large amount of water. Now, water definitely feels like it hasn't, really gelled well with the community in terms of water being part of the game. I personally am not against it for breaking up gameplay routes, which is why I think in Avalon it was going to work. I think the problem with water in the current iteration of the game is that it actually isn't that huge an amount of water, and like when people jump into it, it's like crossing a small stream. So it's like a temporary advantage as opposed to a major gameplay transition or a major rotation away from your opponent. And I think that's why people have issues with it. And I also feel like, water is supposed to be inherently a disadvantage. You're supposed to be on the lower ground, you're supposed to be vulnerable, and that isn't always the case in Urzikstan. But in Avalon, it seems like that is the case. It feels like these waterways that are going through the map here are really large by design to make it as completely unadvantageous as possible to use the water for a transition, which is why these bridges exist, which is why they seem to have tons of cover on them. And I think the intention was to make lots of choke points and rotations throughout the entire map. I'm ultimately a little bit sad that we're not seeing Avalon. I think Verdansk is going to be fun to have, and there's no denying it's going to attract a large audience back to the game. But I do worry that they're going to find the movement system and the general feel of Verdansk to be a bit incompatible, but we'll have to wait and see. And hopefully they do update Verdansk, and I will have a video about that in the not too distant future. We're actually going to walk through Verdansk and talk about the areas of the map that could do with a gameplay update. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts and feelings about not seeing Avalon in 2024. Is it something you're upset about? Is it something you were expecting to see or not expecting to see? Let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you in the next one.